There is a reason your emotions have felt louder lately. A reason your patience has started disappearing in situations where you once stayed silent. And a reason the version of you that used to tolerate emotional exhaustion suddenly feels like it cannot survive inside the same reality for another moment longer. What is unfolding on May 12th is not an ordinary energetic shift, and deep down you already know that. You can feel it in the tension sitting beneath your thoughts, in the strange pressure building inside your chest, in the almost electric sensation that something irreversible is approaching, even if you cannot fully explain why. At exactly 8 at night, the moon enters Aries. But this movement carries far more force than a routine lunar transition. This is the ignition point of the Warrior Moon, the kind of cosmic fire that does not gently inspire change, but instead tears through stagnation and forces buried truths into the open. Something has been sleeping inside you for a very long time. Something frustrated, hungry, and exhausted from compromise. And the moment this lunar energy crosses into Aries, that dormant force begins to wake up completely. The reason this feels so overwhelming is because the moon is not acting alone. The moon is activating something much older, much deeper, and much more psychologically intense than most people realize. As this Aries energy moves across the sky, it strikes one of the most powerful celestial coordinates known to ancient astrology, the point once called the world axis, a location associated with collective turning points, identity shifts, and moments when internal pressure becomes impossible to suppress any longer. The instant the moon touches this point, every emotion you try to numb begins pushing itself back into your awareness. The dreams you buried because they felt unrealistic, the anger you swallowed to keep peace with people who never truly saw your worth, the instincts you ignored because you feared disappointing others, all of it rises at once. This is not subtle energy. This is confrontation. This is the universe removing the emotional anesthesia and forcing you to witness the gap between the life you are living and the life your soul has been demanding. What makes this even more intense is the fact that the energetic window is incredibly short. The Aries moon remains active for only about 2.5 days, which means the choices made during this period carry unusual weight. The conversations you avoid, the actions you finally take, the risks you either embrace or run from. All of it shapes the direction of the next several months and possibly even years ahead. That is why this energy feels urgent. It is not here to let you stay emotionally asleep. It is here to expose whether you are finally willing to move differently. And the truth is, this awakening did not begin today. The emotional build-up has already been happening for days, maybe even longer. You have probably noticed yourself becoming more reactive, more emotionally raw, more frustrated by situations that once felt manageable. Maybe small inconveniences suddenly triggered disproportionate anger. Maybe certain people started irritating you simply because your spirit can no longer tolerate dynamics built on self-betrayal. Maybe you have felt unusually defensive, like every interaction is forcing you to protect some invisible boundary that was ignored for too long. None of this is random moodiness. None of this means you are unstable. It means the Aries current has already entered your system, and your soul has been preparing for impact. Lunar energy does not arrive all at once. It gathers slowly, building pressure beneath the surface, the way an ocean wave grows larger before it finally crashes against the shore. What you are feeling now is that pressure reaching critical mass. Some of you have already started experiencing vivid dreams filled with confrontation, competition, survival, or moments where you finally speak the truth you have been holding back. Others have subtly developed an almost obsessive desire to begin something new, to finally take action on an idea that has been sitting dormant for months. Some of you feel emotionally trapped and cannot explain why the walls around your current reality suddenly feel unbearable. This is the warrior frequency of Aries pushing against every place in your life where fear has been masquerading as safety. The important thing is that most people will misunderstand this energy completely. They will assume their frustration means something is wrong with them. They will interpret their emotional intensity as instability instead of recognizing it as awakening. They will try to sedate themselves with distractions, endless scrolling, emotional avoidance, or overthinking. Because courage feels terrifying when your old identity is beginning to collapse. They will feel the urge to act boldly and immediately talk themselves out of it with logic, delay, and self-doubt. But you are being asked to see this differently. The Aries Moon is not trying to comfort you. It is trying to reveal you to yourself. It is exposing every place where you have minimized your own desires, every moment you accepted less than what your spirit truly wanted. Every time you waited for approval from people who were never capable of understanding your path in the first place. And this is where the story becomes impossible to ignore, because this moon is landing at the exact same degree 0 degrees Aries, where Saturn and Neptune united earlier this year on February 20th, creating one of the most psychologically significant energetic imprints of the entire year. That means the emotional pressure you are feeling now is directly connected to something that began months ago, something planted deep inside your subconscious during that Saturn and Neptune merger. And what happens next is going to reveal whether you are finally ready to become the person that moment was trying to awaken. What makes this moment so dangerous, and at the same time so life-changing, is that the energetic force being activated right now is not ordinary astrology. The conjunction between Saturn and Neptune earlier this year was one of the rarest celestial alignments seen in centuries, unfolding at a point in the sky that only becomes activated approximately every 35 to 36 years. This was not just another transit passing quietly through the background of your life. It was a generational rupture, a cosmic dismantling of outdated systems, false identities, emotional illusions, and entire psychological structures people once believed would last forever. When Saturn merged with Neptune on February 20th, something collective cracked open. Invisible walls began collapsing beneath millions of people all at once. Long-held beliefs started dissolving. Emotional numbness stopped working. Entire versions of reality people depended on for safety began quietly disintegrating beneath their feet. And now, as the moon enters Aries on May 12th, all of that massive pressure becomes personal. The moon acts like a conduit between cosmic energy and human emotion, which means this transit is not staying abstract or philosophical anymore. It is moving directly into your body, your nervous system, your reactions, your choices, and your emotional reality. That is why everything feels heightened. That is why your emotions feel too loud to ignore. The pressure that has been building for months is no longer sitting in the background. It is arriving all at once. The moon is functioning like a trigger, and what it is triggering is the next stage of your evolution. But transformation does not happen through passive wishing. Real evolution demands movement. It demands courage. It demands decisions your previous self would never have dared to make. And this is exactly why your frustration has become impossible to suppress. The irritation you feel toward people, routines, jobs, relationships, or environments that once seemed manageable is not random emotional instability. It is information. Your anger is carrying a message your soul has been trying to deliver for a very long time. Aries is ruled by Mars, the planet associated with action, survival, assertion, and raw instinctive force. Right now, Mars is also moving through Aries, intensifying this entire energetic pattern to an extraordinary degree. But the real reason this energy feels almost explosive is because Mars is approaching an exact conjunction with Chiron on May 16th, only days after the moon moves through Aries. Chiron represents the deepest wound carried within the human psyche, especially the wound connected to identity, self-worth, rejection, and the right to fully exist as yourself without shrinking. When Mars joins Chiron in Aries, astrologers often describe it as the wounded warrior archetype becoming fully activated. Suddenly, the anger you feel is no longer just irritation over surface-level problems. It becomes connected to years of emotional suppression, years of swallowing your truth to avoid conflict, years of being conditioned to stay quiet, stay manageable, stay less intense, stay less visible, stay less authentic so other people could remain comfortable around you. The rage rising now is not meaningless destruction. It is suppressed life force trying to return to the surface. Deep down, your spirit understands something your logical mind is still trying to process. You cannot continue betraying yourself without consequences anymore. That is why your current reality feels unbearable. That is why certain conversations feel suffocating. That is why your patience has disappeared. Your soul is exhausted from compromise. And underneath all of this emotional intensity is a realization beginning to emerge. There is something inside you worth defending. Your dreams are worth defending. Your truth is worth defending. Your future is worth defending. The authentic version of yourself you abandoned in order to survive is worth fighting for. But this is where the crossroads appears, because this energy can manifest in two completely different ways. If unconscious, this anger becomes destructive. It lashes outward recklessly, creates unnecessary chaos, destroys relationships impulsively, and burns bridges without clarity or direction. But if handled consciously, this same energy becomes fuel. It becomes the force that finally pushes you to establish boundaries you were too afraid to enforce before. It becomes the momentum that finally moves you toward goals you have delayed for months or even years. It becomes the fire that helps you step into the identity you secretly knew belonged to you all along, but were terrified to embody publicly. And this is where the first fearless decision begins. The Aries Moon is demanding that you stop waiting for permission to become yourself. For too long, many people have been performing versions of themselves designed to secure approval, avoid rejection, or maintain emotional safety. Entire identities were built around pleasing others, fitting expectations, staying acceptable, and maintaining structures that no longer reflected the truth of who they really were. The Saturn and Neptune conjunction shattered many of those illusions earlier this year. Careers that once felt stable suddenly felt empty. Relationships that looked solid revealed emotional fractures underneath. Beliefs people once trusted dissolved almost overnight. And although painful, this collapse was not punishment. It was exposure. It was the removal of false foundations, so something real could finally emerge in their place. But many people make the same mistake after old systems collapse. Instead of truly transforming, they immediately search for replacement illusions. They find new jobs that drain them differently, new relationships where they sacrifice themselves in slightly altered ways, new identities that still function as performances instead of truth. The Aries Moon interrupts that cycle completely. This energy is not asking you to build another mask. It is demanding authenticity. It is demanding that you stop asking whether other people approve of your choices before you allow yourself to live them. It is demanding that you stop measuring your worth through external acceptance. The energy of today mirrors the archetype of the Fool in Tarot. The soul standing at the edge of the unknown, preparing to leap forward without certainty, not because fear disappeared, but because remaining trapped inside the old life became more painful than the risk of transformation itself. This does not mean acting recklessly or destroying your life impulsively. It means consciously deciding that your truth matters more than temporary comfort. It means choosing growth over emotional stagnation. It means recognizing that your spirit can no longer survive inside realities built entirely around other people's expectations. And as this realization settles deeper into your awareness, the next phase of this awakening begins to reveal itself. The real question this Aries Moon forces you to confront is not whether your life is difficult, chaotic, or uncertain. The real question is whether you are actively creating your reality or simply reacting to whatever circumstances throw at you. And that realization can feel deeply uncomfortable, because many people eventually discover they have been surviving on autopilot for years. They have been emotionally adapting instead of consciously choosing. They have been responding to fear, pressure, expectations, and survival instincts rather than building a life aligned with their actual truth. But the warrior energy moving through the sky right now does not tolerate emotional passivity. Aries energy is movement. It is initiation. It is the force that steps forward before certainty exists. A true warrior does not stand still waiting for perfect timing, guaranteed outcomes, or complete emotional safety. The warrior understands that clarity rarely arrives before action. Clarity emerges because of action. It is found while moving through uncertainty, not while endlessly analyzing it from a distance. This is why the first courageous step changes everything. The moment you finally move toward what your soul has been asking for, something inside your entire energetic field begins reorganizing itself. But before you rush forward under this intense lunar fire, there is something dangerous you need to recognize, because every powerful transit carries a shadow side, and the Aries Moon is no exception. In fact, its shadow can be extremely destructive when handled unconsciously. Aries energy can become impulsive, reckless, explosive, and emotionally reactive if it is not grounded in awareness. This is the side of the warrior archetype that loses wisdom and becomes consumed only by force. It becomes the version of yourself that acts first and thinks later, the version that mistakes chaos for freedom, the version that destroys things emotionally just to feel temporary relief from pressure. Under this moon, there may be a powerful temptation to suddenly burn everything down simply because you are tired of carrying frustration. You may feel the urge to pick unnecessary fights, to prove yourself aggressively, to force outcomes, to dominate conversations, or to make dramatic decisions in moments of emotional intensity that later leave lasting consequences. That is why consciousness matters so much during this transit. The true power of the Aries Moon is not reckless destruction. It is disciplined courage. It is understanding the difference between authentic assertion and uncontrolled aggression. It is knowing when to move boldly and when to pause long enough to reconnect with your deeper intention. Because the highest expression of the warrior archetype does not fight for the sake of conflict itself. It fights for meaning. It protects what is sacred. It defends truth, integrity, healing, and purpose. It acts from inner clarity rather than emotional chaos. And that distinction becomes absolutely critical now, because the energy moving through your life can either liberate you or destabilize you, depending on how consciously you choose to direct it. This is where the second fearless decision begins to emerge through the Mars and Chiron conjunction building in the background of this Aries activation. Most people spend their entire lives hiding from their deepest wounds. They suppress painful memories. They bury rejection. They pretend certain emotional scars no longer affect them. Or worse, they unconsciously allow those wounds to control every major decision they make. Fear becomes the architect of their entire reality. They avoid visibility because they fear criticism. They silence themselves because they fear abandonment. They shrink their desires because disappointment once devastated them so deeply that they no longer trust themselves to survive another emotional blow. But the Warrior Moon offers a completely different path. It offers alchemy, the transformation of pain into purpose, sensitivity into wisdom, and emotional wounds into spiritual strength. Think about the experiences that shaped you most deeply. Maybe you spent years feeling invisible. Maybe your voice was dismissed. Maybe you were constantly told you were too emotional, too intense, too ambitious, or somehow not enough. Maybe part of you learned very early that fully expressing yourself came with punishment, rejection, or isolation. Those experiences did not simply disappear. They moved underground and quietly shaped your behavior from the shadows. They made you cautious where you once wanted to be bold. They made you silence your truth to maintain connection. They taught you to second-guess your instincts. They convinced you that survival required self-limitation. But what if those wounds were never meant to become permanent prisons? What if they were actually training grounds? Because pain changes people, but not always in destructive ways. Sometimes the things that hurt you most also deepen your empathy. Sometimes rejection teaches emotional intelligence. Sometimes abandonment teaches resilience. Sometimes being misunderstood gives you insight into human suffering. The people who lived easier lives never develop. The Aries Moon is asking you to stop seeing your scars as evidence that something is wrong with you. It is asking you to recognize them as proof of what you survived. The goal is not revenge. The goal is transformation. Not becoming hardened, bitter, or emotionally closed off, but becoming stronger without losing your humanity in the process. This is why the spiritual warrior archetype is so powerful. It is not the person who fights simply to conquer others. It is the person who has walked through pain and still chooses growth instead of destruction. It is the soul that could have become cruel, but instead became wise. It is the individual who intimately understands suffering and therefore chooses compassion consciously rather than unconsciously spreading more pain into the world. The fearless decision now is to stop hiding the very experiences that shaped your strength. Stop apologizing for the intensity inside you. Stop treating your emotional depth as a flaw that must constantly be managed to keep others comfortable. Stop allowing your past to define the limits of your future. Your pain taught you something valuable. Your survival changed you. And now the universe is asking whether you are finally ready to use those lessons to build something meaningful instead of continuing to hide behind them. Because this Aries activation is not just about emotional release. It is about identity reconstruction. It is about becoming the version of yourself forged through fire instead of destroyed by it. And as this realization settles into your awareness, another decision begins approaching quietly in the distance, one that will determine the direction your entire path takes from here forward. There is one final decision hidden inside this Aries activation that most people will completely overlook. And the reason they miss it is because the energy of Aries can become so consumed with self-preservation, independence, and personal liberation that it quietly pushes people toward emotional isolation without them even realizing it. This is one of the most deceptive traps of the warrior archetype. At first, it feels empowering. It feels strong. The wounded part of the self begins whispering that needing nobody is the safest path forward. It convinces you that connection creates vulnerability, vulnerability creates pain, and therefore complete emotional independence must be the answer. The shadow warrior says, survive alone, trust nobody, carry everything yourself, stay guarded, stay unreachable. But that mindset eventually becomes its own prison, and the cosmos already knows this. That is why the energetic landscape changes so dramatically immediately after the Aries Moon completes its work. The universe is not only trying to awaken your individual power, it is trying to teach you how to hold that power without disconnecting from humanity in the process. On May 16th, the new moon enters Taurus, bringing an entirely different energetic frequency into the collective field. Suddenly, the intensity of fire begins grounding itself into earth. The focus shifts from impulse to stability, from emotional combustion to sustainable growth, from raw survival instinct to the careful construction of lasting foundations. Then, on May 18th, both Mars and Venus move into new signs, while the Moon enters Cancer, the sign associated with emotional nourishment, security, care, and the deeper need for meaningful belonging. The timing of these transits is not accidental. Together, they reveal the larger lesson unfolding underneath this entire cycle. True sovereignty is not emotional isolation. It is becoming secure enough within yourself that you no longer abandon your identity inside relationships, while also no longer running from intimacy out of fear. And this is where the third fearless decision emerges. You are being asked to pioneer a new version of selfhood, one that rejects the false choice between freedom and connection. For many people, this is the hardest lesson of all, because it demands emotional maturity instead of extremes. It requires holding multiple truths at once, without collapsing into black and white thinking. You are allowed to take up space in this world, and so are the people around you. Your needs matter deeply, and your actions still affect others. You can protect your individuality without emotionally disconnecting from everyone who cares about you. You can remain fiercely authentic while also learning how to sustain healthy relationships. This is the evolution the Aries Moon is ultimately pushing you toward. The most powerful warrior is not the one who dominates everyone around them or isolates themselves emotionally from human connection. The most powerful warrior is the one who understands balance, the one who establishes boundaries without cruelty, the one who speaks truth without humiliating others, the one who pursues purpose without trampling every relationship in the process, the one who knows when independence is necessary and when support is equally sacred. This archetype walks away from relationships that demand self-betrayal, but it also possesses the courage to remain emotionally present inside relationships that genuinely matter. And that is where many people struggle most, because vulnerability feels terrifying after disappointment, rejection, or emotional pain. Many individuals unconsciously sabotage intimacy because they associate emotional openness with danger. They push people away before abandonment can happen naturally. They confuse emotional distance with strength, because closeness once wounded them deeply. Under this Aries Moon, you may begin noticing exactly where this pattern exists inside your own life. You may suddenly recognize relationships you are damaging unnecessarily out of defensiveness or fear. You may realize certain bridges are being burned, not because they truly need to end, but because vulnerability feels more threatening than loneliness. And that realization can become profoundly uncomfortable because it forces you to confront the possibility that some of your isolation was never empowerment at all. It was protection. The truth is that the bravest thing a human being can do is not disappearing from everyone and surviving alone. The bravest thing is remaining connected while still remaining fully yourself. It is telling the truth, even when honesty creates discomfort. It is expressing needs openly without shame. It is allowing yourself to be seen without performing a carefully edited version of your identity for approval. It is building relationships based on authenticity instead of emotional masks. And when you commit to that path, something extraordinary begins happening internally. You stop splitting yourself into fragments. You stop choosing between strength and softness, between freedom and love, between independence and belonging. Instead, you begin creating a life capable of holding all parts of who you are simultaneously. But there is another crucial truth hidden inside this Aries activation that most people fail to understand until it is too late. Aries energy is cardinal fire. It is brilliant at initiation. It excels at breakthroughs, awakenings, confrontations, and beginnings. It creates sparks, powerful enough to completely redirect a life. But sustaining transformation is not naturally Aries territory. Fire burns intensely and quickly. Without structure, it eventually burns out. Without discipline, it becomes scattered. Without grounding, it loses direction. And this is why the cosmic timing surrounding these transits is so important. The Aries Moon provides the ignition. It supplies the courage to finally move, speak, act, and break through stagnation. But immediately afterward, the universe begins anchoring that fire into something sustainable. The new moon in Taurus on May 16th arrives like a stabilizing force, saying now that you initiated change, can you maintain it? Mars moving into Taurus on May 18th reinforces this lesson further by redirecting warrior energy away from impulsive emotional explosions and toward persistence, patience, and practical effort. This is the piece most people overlook. They feel inspired during the fire phase. They make dramatic declarations, emotional breakthroughs, impulsive decisions, or temporary changes fueled by adrenaline. But because they never build structure underneath those transformations, the momentum fades and old patterns eventually return. Real change requires follow-through. It requires consistency after the emotional intensity disappears. It requires the unglamorous work of building new habits, sustaining healthier choices, and reinforcing new identities day after day, even when the emotional high is gone. The Aries Moon awakens something inside you, but remaining awake afterward becomes your responsibility. That is why the decisions made now matter so much. These transits are not simply emotional entertainment. They are invitations into a different future. The spark is arriving today, but the real transformation begins in the days and weeks that follow. And before this energy fully reaches its peak, there is one final warning that cannot be ignored. Do not underestimate what this Aries activation is capable of doing to the human spirit, because this energy is not arriving softly. It is not slow, delicate, or emotionally negotiable. When the moon crosses into Aries and touches that powerful world axis point today, something inside people begins reaching a breaking point, and whether they understand astrology or not, they are going to feel it. The body will recognize it before the mind does. There will be an electric restlessness moving beneath the skin, an agitation that makes stillness almost impossible to tolerate. Some people will suddenly feel emotionally trapped inside routines that once felt manageable. Others will notice irritation surfacing over situations they previously ignored for years. There may be an overwhelming sensation that something inside is demanding movement immediately, as though the soul itself has become tired of waiting for permission to live honestly. Emotionally, this energy can feel like pressure building inside a sealed container. Frustration rises faster. Patience becomes thinner. Anything associated with limitation, suppression, emotional control, or stagnant environments begins feeling unbearable. But alongside that intensity comes something equally important: clarity. Sudden realizations start appearing almost out of nowhere. You begin understanding what can no longer continue. You recognize where your energy has been draining away. You suddenly see which relationships, habits, identities, or fears are preventing your life from evolving. The Aries Moon does not gently whisper these truths. It exposes them forcefully. And once you see them clearly, pretending not to know becomes impossible. This is why today represents a threshold moment, psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually. Because once the universe places that level of awareness directly in front of you, a choice immediately follows. Some people will react unconsciously to this pressure. They will lash out impulsively because the emotional intensity feels too overwhelming to contain. They will destroy things recklessly, simply to escape discomfort for a moment. They will make decisions rooted in anger, ego, or emotional volatility without understanding the long-term consequences attached to those actions. Under unconscious Aries energy, the desire for liberation can easily mutate into chaos. But there is another path available now, one that requires awareness, restraint, and courage at the same time. You can choose to respond consciously instead of react emotionally. You can direct this fire instead of being consumed by it. And this is where the three fearless decisions become more than abstract spiritual ideas. They become initiations. The first decision asks whether you are finally willing to stop waiting for external approval before becoming yourself completely. The second asks whether you are ready to transform the pain that shaped you into the very source of your strength, instead of allowing it to remain a hidden wound, controlling your life from the shadows. The third asks whether you can evolve beyond the false belief that independence requires emotional isolation, and instead learn how to remain authentic while still allowing meaningful connection into your life. These are not casual lessons. They are the deeper purpose hidden beneath this entire cosmic sequence. And the people who answer this call consciously are going to notice dramatic shifts unfolding over the coming months. New pathways begin appearing unexpectedly. Opportunities arrive that once seemed impossible. Emotional stagnation starts breaking apart. Situations that previously felt blocked begin moving again because internal alignment changes external reality more than most people realize. When someone finally stops betraying themselves internally, the world around them begins reorganizing in response. But the opposite is also true. Those who ignore this activation, those who desperately cling to emotional comfort, avoid necessary change, suppress their truth, or continue shrinking themselves to maintain familiar patterns, may find themselves trapped in the same cycles, repeatedly wondering why life never changes, despite how badly they want transformation. The truth is that the universe cannot move someone into a new chapter while they remain psychologically devoted to the old one. Fear alone cannot become the architect of your future anymore. And this is one of the most important truths hidden inside the warrior archetype. Courage is not something that magically arrives before action. Most people wait their entire lives believing they need to feel fearless before they move forward. But that is not how transformation works. The warrior acts while fear still exists. Action creates courage. Movement creates momentum. Every step taken toward authenticity strengthens the part of the soul that remembers who it really is. This is why today matters so deeply. This is not just another emotional transit passing through the sky. This is a threshold between versions of yourself. One version continues tolerating the life built through fear, compromise, exhaustion, and emotional suppression. The other version begins choosing truth, alignment, purpose, and conscious transformation, even when uncertainty remains. And somewhere inside yourself, you already know which life you truly want. The question is whether you are finally willing to claim it. Because the answer you give today does not disappear after this moon passes. It echoes forward into everything that follows. The decisions made under this fire become the blueprint for the months ahead. So choose carefully. Choose consciously. Choose with the understanding that your future is listening to every action you take right now. And if you have stayed all the way through this message, it likely means something inside you already recognizes that this moment matters. If this message resonated with you and you want to continue exploring these deeper energetic shifts together, consider subscribing and becoming part of this journey moving forward. Your support truly means more than you realize. And if you feel comfortable, share your thoughts and experiences below, especially how this Aries Moon energy has already been showing up in your life, and what changes you feel being called to make. Until next time, take care of yourself. Stay conscious with this powerful energy and remain open to the transformation that is already beginning.